Greetings to Pete and all the friends at the UK convention. I'm sorry things didn't work out for me to be here with you today, but at least with the inventions of the camcorders, at least I can be here in this way and share with you some of my experiences over the 25 years that I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and also to tell you a little bit about my new book, Awakening of a Jehovah's Witness, Escape from the Watchtower Society. I came in touch with Jehovah's Witnesses in 1968 during a time when I was very vulnerable. And I was literally scared into the organization by a supposed imminence of Armageddon going to happen in 1975, or maybe even sooner. I was also lured into the organization with their promise of paradise. Well, you know how it works. I don't need to tell you about the recruiting techniques that the witnesses use on people to get them involved in the organization. But I would like to share with you some of my experiences during the time that I was a witness. Now, of course, before getting baptized, I was required to go out in the house-to-house witnessing work. And I was always paired with another person to teach me how to do this important work. And so it was that I was working with a sister, and I noticed that every time a householder would start talking about Jesus, she got really, really nervous. In fact, she would usually grab me by the arm and scurry away from the house, and we'd get out to the sidewalk, out of hearing of the householder, and she would say, "Did you see his eyes? He must have been demonized." And so that was the prevalent view of the householders who talked too much about Jesus, that they were demonized. I also had a very unusual experience when I was teamed with a particular brother to work in the house-to-house work. Now, this brother, you got to understand, was kind of different. He used to corner the sisters at every opportunity he got to talk about sex. He was obsessed with sex. I really don't know how he got away with it or why I didn't turn him into the elders, but at any rate, he would often corner me. And so I got assigned to work with him in the house-to-house work. And so we would take turns knocking on the doors, talking to the people. And so it happened that it was his turn. And so he rang the doorbell, and here comes this beautiful, beautiful woman, young woman. And she was only clad in just skimpy shorts. She didn't have any clothes on except for these skimpy little pair of shorts. And so he was just speechless. And he looked at her, and now witness protocol, of course, would require that he excuse himself and leave and come back at a different time, hopefully when she has clothes on. But he didn't. He didn't. He attempted to give the witness message, to give his sermon, to read a scripture from the Bible, but the whole time he's standing there and he's just shaking like that, and he's stammering and stuttering while he's talking to her. And finally he gets to the point where he says, "You have to excuse me, ma'am, but I'm having a hard time keeping my mind on the Bible, ma'am." Now, this was so hilarious to me because of all the brothers that this could have happened to, him, of all people. And it took every ounce of self-control just to not burst out laughing right then and there. Now, my congregation had a real thing about demons. They love to tell demon stories, much like people who go camping and they sit around a campfire and tell ghost stories. When the witnesses would get together in private gatherings at the homes, often they would talk about demon stories. One sister talked about her Bible study. She said, "My Bible study, her blanket is demonized. Well, when she beckons it to come, it comes and it creeps up her body and it snuggles itself all around her neck." Then another sister said, "Look at this beautiful sofa that my fleshly sister gave me. Why, she must be involved in spiritism. Now, don't sit on it, because every person who has sat on it has developed the insatiable desire to kill somebody, and so I have to get rid of it." Another sister said, "My worldly son, he came to visit me, and while I was in the kitchen cooking dinner, a demon attacked me and spun me around in circles." Now, all these stories, mind you, were told in rather hushed undertones, because the belief was that if the demons overheard you talking about him in this way, then you are going to be the next attack, the demon's next attack. Well, I went home And I couldn't help but thinking and thinking and thinking about all these things. And so I lived alone at the time with my young baby. So I went to bed and I had my blankets pulled up to my chin and I sat there and I was worried about if the demons were ever going to come after me. And so I remember that the witnesses said, oh, if the demons ever attack you, just shout the name Jehovah and they'll go away. So I lay there in my bed and I was worrying about this and worrying about this. And all of a sudden, it's almost as if some unseen presence could read my mind. I felt the presence of something under my bed. And then it moved. And then it skittered across the hardwood floor and it bumped into a wall. Ah, it must be the demons, I thought. Oh no. And so I tried to call out Jehovah, but my voice, it was just a little whisper, Jehovah. Well, it didn't help, because then these unseen presence, I heard the noises like fingernails scraping against the wood floor under my bed. And then I heard these unseen presence. They came colliding underneath my bed from all directions at once. I was so petrified. And I was finally able to shout out, Jehovah! Jehovah! Why wasn't it working? The demons, they just wouldn't go away. Then I remembered that one brother said that the demons are afraid of light and they love the darkness. And so I thought, oh, if only I could reach up there and just turn on that light switch, the demons would go away. So finally I did. I turned on that light switch and the room was illuminated and I came face to face with the demons. It was really just a bunch of mice. Now this speaks to the mindset of the witnesses, though, that they're just so ready. They're so obsessed with this thought about demons that they're so ready to attribute any unusual occurrence to demons. Listening and telling these demon stories, it seemed to reinforce in the minds of all the witnesses who were there the need to stay closely involved in all organizational activities in order to avoid being attacked by the demons, in order to have Jehovah's protection. Hearing these stories also developed in me a phobia of ever leaving the organization, because out there I would be away from Jehovah's protection and I would be a sure mark for the demons to attack. I was baptized in 1970, but I had some doubts. I told the elders I don't understand all the doctrines. And they said, don't worry about it. Just put them on the shelf, as it were. Don't let your lack of ability to understand cheat you and your baby out of eternal life in the paradise. Just put your doubts on the shelf, and later, when you become spiritually mature, you'll understand these things. Well, everybody was talking about 1975, and then there was the possibility that Armageddon would happen sooner, and there was no other way that my baby and I could be saved except for me to get baptized. And so I shelved my doubts and I went ahead and I went to the convention or the assembly to be baptized. And there at the baptism talk, well, there was a group of about 80 candidates for baptism. And I knew we were going to be asked some questions, but I didn't know what they were. And I certainly was not prepared for the elder to suddenly boom out, "Will you disown yourselves?" And I thought, oh no, what have I got myself into? Disown myself to the organization? And so I didn't answer that question. But nobody knew, because there was 79 other people who shouted, yes! So I went ahead and got baptized anyway. But despite my reservation on that day, I did eventually come under the total control of the Watchtower Society. Now things changed after I got baptized. Well, the sisters who were so loving and kind to me before I got baptized, they were cliquish and they didn't include me any longer. And so pretty soon I got remarried, and this time to a witness man. Within 3 months I was pregnant, and then the disillusionment with the organization really started setting in. Because I have the Rh negative blood factor, and the doctor was telling me that this could cause severe health problems for the baby. However, modern science has developed the cure for this, a preventative tool. It's called a ROGAM shot. Just one injection, and I won't have to worry about anything bad happening to the baby because of the Rh negative factor. But the elder said, no, you can't have that. It's made from a microscopic fraction of blood. And witnesses can't have blood in any form. You can't have it. And so I said no. And the doctor, he was so angry, he just pounded his fist on that desk like that, and he said, "You're tying my hands. Here, I have something that will completely protect the baby, and you won't allow me to give it to you." Well, if the baby is born with severe problems due to the Rh factor, the cure that we use, most often the treatment that we choose, is a total exchange blood transfusion. And of course you won't allow that. You are totally tying my hands. We can see why doctors would get so frustrated. Well, my baby was born okay, fortunately. She has the same blood type as me. However, another sister was not so fortunate, and her baby was born with severe cerebral palsy, directly attributable to not having that ROGAM shot. And she lives with that guilt to this day, and she's having a hard time with it. After I had the baby, I had to have my baby born cesarean section, as I did with my first child. And after that, the doctors told me that my womb was so severely scarred that it's likely that it would not support another pregnancy. And that, coupled with all the other health problems that I had, he said it's likely that you'll die if you get pregnant. So let us help you save your life. Let us perform a tubal ligation, just a cutting and tying of the fallopian tubes, and it will prevent a pregnancy. So I thought, great idea. But the brothers didn't think so. They said, no, you can't do it. It's a mutilation of your reproductive organs. I actually had to meet with the judicial committee about this. And they said it doesn't matter, it's better to die faithful to Jehovah than to mutilate your reproductive organs. I said, my reproductive organs are mutilated already. They're extremely scarred. And they could rupture, and the baby could drown in blood, the doctor said. Well, the elders said, if you go ahead and do this procedure, your husband will never advance in the ranks in the organization. And Jehovah will have nothing to do with you until he kills you at Armageddon. But it's your choice. Some choice. Because of course I didn't have it, and I lived in fear for years that I was going to get pregnant and die. It was a lot of emotional trauma. And then what happened about 3 years later? Well, the Watchtower Society comes out with an article in their magazine. And they said, if a woman's life is on the line, it's okay for her to have the tubal ligation surgery. And they went ahead and listed most of the reasons that were in my letter that I had written to them previously, asking for special permission to have this procedure, which they denied. So, instead of being elated, I felt really, really angry. And I went up to an elder and I said, I am really upset. If it's okay with Jehovah for me today to have this procedure, I think it would have been okay with him to have had it 3 years ago, and not have to live in this horrible emotional stress that I've been through and possibly put my life in danger. And he said to me, sister, you should get down on your knees, and you should thank Jehovah for changing his mind. And I thought, what? Jehovah didn't change his mind. It was the men in the governing body who changed their mind. And so the real disillusionment with the organization started full force at this point. Well, sometime later, we had a circuit assembly, and there was a featured speaker, one of the members of the governing body. So after the assembly was over, I ran up to him, and I told him how angry I was with the organization, with the society, for putting my life in danger like that for nothing, and how, please help me get over this anger, because I am really, really angry. And he simply looked at me very coolly and without any compassion. And he said, now, sister, you weren't really hurt, were you? Excuse me, I have others to talk to. And that was how he handled it. I experienced many abuses at the hands of the Watchtower Society, just too many to go into now with the short time we have here, but I do go into them more in my book. But at this point, at any rate, after almost 20 years of abuses of all sorts from the organization, I thought I need some building up, because I was still under the impression that this is God's organization. Imperfect as it is, I was buying into the idea that it was still his, even though I was very angry about that, how imperfect it was. So I decided, I'll go to New York. I'll go visit Bethel. And that's where Jehovah's Spirit is said to be. And so I want to feel that. So I made a trip from California all the way to New York to visit Bethel. There were 2 brothers from my congregation who worked there, and so because of that I was invited to have lunch with them and with all the Bethelites. And I'll never forget my experience there. It knocked my socks off. We were sitting at the table, and food was sitting there on plates. And one plate had some meat, and it was very, very thinly sliced, and there was exactly the number, 1 for each person at the table. And the same thing with a plate of cheese, very thin slices, 1 for each one. And the same thing with the bread. So they said a prayer, and after that, the brothers, they just started grabbing this food and just started eating it. And I thought, how rude. We're visitors here, and they're not even talking to us. They're not even enjoying each other's association. They're just eating that food like there's not going to be any more. And then I noticed one of the brothers was assigned to be the hopper. And as soon as those plates, the serving plates were empty, which was almost immediately, he took off and he goes running up to the serving window, and he gets more on there. Again, 1 thin little piece, 1 for each person, and he brings it back, and the brothers dive into it, and they're eating it just like that. And this goes on and on and on for as long as the lunch time is. And I thought, my goodness, they're so ravenous. And then all of a sudden I found out why. A bell rang. And all the brothers, they put down their forks and knives, they stood up at attention, and they marched out the door, all in a line. And I don't think that lunch was any more than 15 minutes long. And I thought, oh my goodness, it's no wonder that they're all so thin. After that, we took a guided tour of the factory, and there would be various brothers at the different stations of the book manufacturing process. So we got to the area where the Bibles were made, and here was this brother who was like in his late 20s, and he was shocking to look at because he was completely bald, even though he's such a young man. In fact, he didn't have any eyebrows, no eyelashes, no visible hair on his arms or anything. And so he greeted us with a smile, and he knew that people were in shock to look at him. And he said, I am completely devoid of all body hair. That's how he greeted us. He says, I wasn't always this way. I wasn't like this before I came to Bethel. But after about 3 months here, all of a sudden, I lost all my body hair everywhere. He said, they sent me to doctors, but nobody can figure out why. And I thought, gee, I wonder why. The stress at this place that I felt, the complete lack of the absence of Jehovah's Spirit that I felt, it's no wonder that something like that could happen. When I got back home, my next door neighbor was a sister that I had developed a pretty close friendship with. And she had never been to Bethel, so she wants to know all about my experience. And so I told her, I said the experience was not upbuilding, it was a negative experience, and I didn't feel Jehovah's presence there at all, and the whole experience very upsetting to me. Well, she replied, I can't imagine that a visit to Bethel could be anything but upbuilding. And from that point on, she was cool to me, and our friendship was over. There was an elder in our congregation who was extremely strict. He was a very, very powerful man. He walked around strutting like a rooster wherever he went. All the witnesses were in great fear of this particular elder, including other elders from surrounding congregations. He was very strict with the brothers and sisters. For example, one day when the group met for field service, it was a very cold day, and the sisters are not allowed to wear slacks going in the house-to-house work. It was cold and windy, and she had just gotten over from being sick with the flu. And so she wore a nice, beautiful wool-plaid, ankle-length skirt to keep herself warm. And so this elder, he walks up to her and he says, you can't go out with us in field service. You have to go home and change your clothes. You're dressed immodestly. Your skirt is too long. Then there was the time when my son had a very good friend. He was the son of a witness woman from another congregation. And so we lived pretty far apart. And so we invited the boy to come and stay the weekend with us. And he was in the first grade, 6 or 7 years old. And he had a haircut like little boys do with like little bangs here. And so this elder, he called me to the side after the meeting and he chastised me. He said, you are bringing a bad name on your family by having this boy stay with you. And I said, why? He's a very well-behaved boy. He loves Jehovah. He said, look at the style of the boy's haircut. I said, well, he's just a little boy, so he has these little bangs. Well, look at the ministerial servant over there. He's got the same haircut. And this elder, in surprise, he looked over there, and sure enough, he did. And the elder said, well, it looks better on him. And so he was always inflicting his own personal opinions in judgment against the brothers and sisters. One time when the congregation was singing, you know, the joyful kingdom songs that sound like funeral dirges? Well, behind me there was a young couple, and they had really good voices, and they used to like to sing in harmony at home. They'd play the guitar and sing. Well, all of a sudden, one day I heard this beautiful music, and it was them behind me, and they were singing in harmony to the congregation singing the melody. And it was beautiful, and it made me feel uplifted. Sure enough, right after the congregation meeting, that elder took those two to the side, and he said, I forbid you ever to sing in harmony ever again, because you're drawing attention to yourselves. And this was also discouraging to me. This is the same elder that would warn the congregation, talking too much about Jesus is a sure sign that you're leaving the truth. So it happened that the big convention, the district convention, this particular elder was the convention overseer there. And during the lunch break, my husband and I, we went over to the trucking department, and he had an office in the trucking department. And he said to us, come over here and look, somebody hung a picture on the wall. And the picture was a picture of Darth Vader. Maybe you've seen the Star Wars movie, and Darth Vader is this mean, ugly thing. And they crossed out Vader, and they wrote this elder's last name there with a big black felt pen. And they hung that in there. And he says, can you imagine, why would anybody do this? And he was so puzzled and offended. And I thought, gee, I wonder why somebody would think that about him. It was really funny. After the convention was over, I wanted to go talk to this elder about a matter that had come up during the convention. And so I went to his office, but I paused at the entranceway because I could see that he was busy talking to another brother in there. So I just stood in the entranceway respectfully and waited. They didn't see me. And then the one that's the convention overseer, he said to the other one, boy, after a convention like this, I need a drink. And he pulled out the bottom drawer of that desk, and he took out a bottle of hard liquor, and he started pouring. And then he looked up and he saw me. That was a really good moment. He said, oh, sister, I hope I haven't stumbled you. For him to be so strict with others, and yet to be doing this, I thought if there was any other brother here walking around with a bottle of booze, they wouldn't get away with it like that. And so the hypocrisy of the elders really impressed itself on me. My daughter, we raised her from infancy to be a witness, of course, and she was a model witness. And she was often on assembly programs and looked up to as a fine example. When she became an older teenager, she said to me one day, I think this religion is weird. And when I'm 18, I'm going to move out of the house and I'm leaving the religion. And when she was 18, that day, she did exactly that. Well, the elders just couldn't stand it. They wanted to meet with her because, after all, they had used her as a fine example for all these years. But she didn't want to meet with them. And so they decided that they were going to employ a theocratic war strategy. They were going to force a confrontation with her. And here's how they did it. My husband and I were away celebrating our 20th anniversary, and the elders knew this. And we had asked a brother that we had known from a little boy, and he was now grown up. And we asked him to take care of our house, take care of the plants in the mail, and watch over the house while we're gone. And the elders knew that. The elders also knew that this brother had been very good friends with my daughter Stephanie for many, many years. And so they took advantage of our absence, and they took advantage of the friendship that she had with this young man. And they called him up and they said, we want to have a confrontation with Stephanie. We need your help, brother. We want you to call her up and make up something that's wrong with the house. Just, it doesn't have to be true. Just make something up that will have a sense of urgency to it, that will get Stephanie to come over. And tell her, I need your help, Stephanie, because I need to deal with whatever this problem would be before your parents come home. So he did that. And so my daughter trusted the friendship. And she said, okay, I'll be there at 7:30 at night. So by that time it was dark, and the elders arrived way in advance of my daughter so they could position themselves. I know this happened because when I came back from the trip, this young man that was taking care of the house told me all about it. He said, there's a fence between your house and the house next door, and so one of the elders hid behind that fence, and another one hid behind that telephone pole over there, and another one hid behind the parked car over here in the driveway, and another one went behind the tree. And they waited in ambush for my daughter, ready to pounce out at her as soon as her car pulled up. They knew her car, so her car pulled up, and out stepped this young woman, and it was dark, and they couldn't see if it was her or not, but they assumed that it would be. And so as she walked up the path to the house, the elders just jumped out at her and just accosted her from all directions. You can imagine their chagrin when they found out it wasn't my daughter at all, because my daughter had an intuition, a sense that something was up, and she sent her best friend instead. So the elders, they were so frustrated they couldn't stand it. They disfellowshipped my daughter without even sufficient grounds and no witnesses. They told me I had to shun her, that I had to pretend she was dead, that I could never see her ever again, I could never talk to her, I could never write her letters, I could never go see her, unless she came back to the congregation and asked to be reinstated as a witness. Well, I did this for 3 months, and it broke my heart. And so I told my husband I was going to go see her. And he said to me, if you do that, you know what I have to do. And I know that meant that he had to turn me in and report me to the elders. And so I went to see her, and when he saw that that's what I did, he called up the presiding overseer, who was none other than Darth himself, to report me. The next day, he came along with the circuit overseer, and I thought, oh no, here they come marching up the path. I'm sure they're going to disfellowship me for visiting my daughter. And I'm sure that's what good old Darth had in his mind too. And so they sat on my sofa. Now the circuit overseer was an older, more kindly man, and he said to me, I've never had a daughter, but I can imagine how difficult it would be for a mother to completely shun her daughter. And so if you just can't stand it, just take her to the back of a smoky restaurant and just don't tell anybody about it. Well, the presiding overseer, Darth Vader right there, he was not prepared to hear this. His jaw hung open in shock. I thought his teeth were going to fall out. He started squirming in his chair, and the expression on his face, it was just priceless. He certainly didn't expect that. As time went on, I became very upset with the many zigzags in the doctrines of the society, which I'm sure that you're all very well aware of. And the longer I stayed in the organization, the more of these zigzags I saw. Until it got to the point where it was really hard for me to even remember exactly what the truth was at any given moment. One of the zigzags that bothered me a lot was the society's view on rape. They said that if a man attacks a woman and he has a gun to her head or a knife to her throat, and he says, if you scream, I will kill you. If the woman believes him and doesn't scream, why, the Watchtower says, that's not rape at all. Well, that's willful sex, that's fornication. The Watchtower failed to see that rape is truly an act of violence. It's not an act of passion at all. I guess, it seems like Jehovah of the Watchtower, he just is not astute enough to be able to read the heart of the victim and know that she's being raped and not giving in to lustful sexual desires. In 1974, the society went so far as to say that a witness woman who doesn't scream during the rape attack can be disfellowshipped. And now just think about this. Disfellowshipping is a complete cutting off from Jehovah God and all the congregation members. And here they are. They're making a victim, once again, of the victim. Instead of realizing this is a time when this rape victim needs friends to support her, they'll say, you didn't scream, we're disfellowshipping you. And by the way, I found at least 2 women that this happened to. Well, they're cutting off all social support for her. Plus, at a time when she really needs to be comforted, they're saying that Jehovah's going to have nothing to do with you and he's going to kill you at Armageddon for it. This is a huge trauma. Believe me, I know it firsthand. They add to their pain by psychologically isolating that person from God. Jehovah's Witnesses teach that Jehovah is going to kill everyone who's in a disfellowshipped state at Armageddon. And of course, Armageddon is always imminent, always imminent. It's always just around the corner going to happen. And so, by their disfellowshipping a woman who wouldn't scream during a rape attack, they're literally giving her a death sentence and saying that she's worthy of eternal death by so doing. Well, in 1983, new light shone from Jehovah. There was an article put out in the magazine that talked about the Greek word for the word fornication. The Greek word for fornication was porneia, and they definitely stated, they said a person who is forcibly raped is not guilty of porneia. Wow, I thought they finally see the light. They can make this differentiation between rape and fornication. The rape victims who couldn't scream previously, they kind of now have been acquitted. Wow, what a release. What a relief. Amazingly, only 9 months later, society did a 180-degree turn back to the former view that if you don't scream while you're being raped, it's fornication. I couldn't believe it. And so I did a study of the history of the organization around this doctrine, and I found that over a 30-year time period, they zigzagged back and forth and back and forth. No, it's fornication if you don't scream. Oh, no, it isn't. It's rape. Oh, no, it's fornication. They zigzagged back and forth 12 times. Most of the years were spent in the category of if you don't scream, it's fornication. Brief times over here on the other side. It just got to the point where witness women who had been raped, they started feeling like ping pong balls being played between the yes and no panel of the Watchtower Society. Also to note that in 1964, they went to the extreme of saying that a witness woman who is attacked, she should even fight to the death. It's better to die loyal to Jehovah than to be raped. Incidentally, I don't think that's in the Bible, is it? That you have to fight your rapist to the death? In a sense, the society was saying that a woman protecting her chastity, that was more important than protecting her life. I thought how skewed this is. And I wondered how many sisters had died from heeding the society's admonition about this. Well, in 1984, the society went to the other extreme, total opposite extreme. And they printed an article in the Awake magazine with a subheading, "Treat him respectfully." This is so outrageous and so unbelievable that I'm going to read this to you verbatim from the Awake magazine of February 22, 1984, on page 24, in an article dealing with rape. And it said, "Treat him respectfully. The intended victim should remember that the rapist is a human. No doubt there are circumstances in his life that have precipitated his behavior. So although a woman should not cower in fear and permit a rapist to intimidate her, at the same time she should treat him understandingly as a fellow human." I thought, they've really gone overboard now. I couldn't believe it, yet I still stayed in the organization. I couldn't break away. And I started seeing the organization, the Watchtower Society, kind of like a TV set. Like a TV set. It gets its signals, and then they broadcast through the TV screen. Well, the Watchtower Society is sort of similar. They say, oh, we get our signals from Jehovah, and we broadcast them to the world through our literature. And so I started wondering, if Jehovah's doing this broadcasting, sending these signals, why is it that the screen is so full of static? Can't he communicate it clearly? And then it dawned on me. Maybe the Watchtower Society's TV set isn't even plugged in. And so around this point I became inactive, and I withdrew from the meetings and everything so I could get away from their thinking and do some deep research into the history of the organization, since this had all been hidden from me the whole 25 years I was in the organization. I wanted to check in specifically on the spiritual food that they had been feeding the witnesses. They say that in the year 1919 or so, that Jesus looked down upon the earth and inspected all the religions and chose the Watchtower Society because of the quality of the spiritual food that they were feeding the people. And so I thought, I'm going to go check on this. Because, at times I would just cry out to Jehovah, please, please let this not be the truth. And now I wanted to decide for myself if I really thought it was or not. I found some pretty amusing things. One of them, they had a lot of quack medical advice. Here's some of the things I found out. The medical profession is demonized. Dreams are caused by demons. It's no wonder my congregation was obsessed with demons, isn't it? Tonsillectomy is worse than suicide. I'm going to read you this, and I quote, "If any overzealous doctor condemns your tonsils, go ahead and commit suicide with a case knife. It's cheaper and less painful." As unbelievable as that is, it came from the Golden Age magazine, April 7th, 1926. Another bit of their spiritual wisdom was, a level-headed doctor does not study germs because germs do not cause disease. Disease are caused by wrong vibrations. Here, we'll even sell you through the pages of the Society's magazines a contraption called the electronic radiobiola, which will diagnose and cure your disease through the use of counter vibrations. Modern day science considers the man who invented that to be one of the world's greatest quacks. And then I got a hold of a book called The Finnish Mystery, which was printed in 1917. Wow, hot off the press when Jesus came down to inspect the spiritual food. I thought, I got to get that book and I got to read it. And so I did get a copy of it. And it was full of nonsense. I'll read you one particular point that I thought was very amusing. And this is talking about the function of hair. And I quote, "One function of hair is to lead off vapors which could otherwise choke and make the brain smoky, which leads to the conclusion that all modern church organizations were founded by bald-headed men." And the smoke, being unable to find its way out through their scalp, naturally had to come out of their mouths instead. I thought, there is no way that Jesus chose this group as the channel. But I still couldn't leave the organization. So I got into therapy with a psychologist for a couple of years, and he helped me see how my personal psychology was holding me hostage in the organization. And I talk about this therapy experience in my book as well. Finally, he suggested that I read a few books about cults. And so I finally did, and I noticed that as I'd read these different characteristics of cults, if I found that they matched those of the Watchtower Society, I put a little check mark in the margin. And pretty soon that whole book had check marks all over the place. And I still couldn't leave. And then I thought I was in this organization by my own free choice. But if I was, I should be able to leave of my own free choice. And I couldn't. I couldn't leave, even though I desperately wanted to leave. And that tells me that there's something else at play. And I discovered that to be mind control. So I got to the point where I had a very dramatic dream. This dream was that I was sitting in a heap on the floor. And I had this blanket over me. And it felt like the blanket was made of lead. And I was all curled up in there, and I kept screaming for somebody to take the blanket off of me. And nobody would. And so I just mustered up all the strength I could get, and finally I just hurled that thing off of me. This dream was so dramatic that I brought it into my therapy session with the psychologist. I asked him for his interpretation of the dream. He said, I think the lead blanket is a symbol of the oppression of the organization so heavy oppressing you. And the fact that nobody would take the blanket off, that means that there is no one who can rescue you from the organization. Just as you hurled the blanket off of yourself, you are going to be the only one that can rescue yourself from the organization. And so after I learned about cults and mind control and how my psychology of an abusive childhood fit in with belonging to an abusive religion, I finally got to the point where I was able to disassociate myself in 1993. I just made a simple statement that I delivered to the house of every elder, just saying that I am voluntarily disassociating myself from the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses under the rule of the Watchtower Society, and that's it, because if I had written any explanation, they would have taken that and disfellowshipped me. And for me, it was important for me to be the one in control, for me to make the decision to leave this organization, and not that they controlled me by throwing me out. When I left, I had a mixture of a lot of emotions, some of which were anger at the organization, this organization that I trusted had deceived me and treated me so badly. I was angry that the witnesses' constant preparation for the end of the world left me so unprepared to be alive in it. But I also felt joy from being released from bondage to the dictates of mere men. And I also felt triumphant at reclaiming at last my mind and my life. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and it would be real nice if you'd make a video of some of the convention, and then I could get to meet all of you and hear some of your speeches. And I hope that you enjoyed reading Awakening of a Jehovah's Witness, Escape from the Watchtower Society. And I hope to see you all someday at a convention.